Hi, everybody. It's August 15th, and I get to say it. Half the month is gone. I said on Monday that I would say that, and I would have to wait until the 15th, which today is. So half the month is gone, and it's Politics by Jake, and we're doing our usual bi-weekly, that is Monday and Friday show, 7 a.m. here on KCAA, but you can also listen to it on podcast. Go to kcaaradio.com and then check the Monday or Friday schedule. And when you click on that and the page opens up, you'll see me. I'm right there next to Stephanie Miller at 7 a.m. And you can click on my page. You can listen to the live stream, or you can download the podcast. And with that, let's get going. And I want to talk about so many things. Golly. Let's talk about a bit of current info. Well, I mean, we're going to be talking about several pieces of current information. Let's talk about this summit that's going to be occurring. Now, I have to say, the reason this summit is occurring, I don't want to be so fundamental and so simplistic to say that it's about Epstein, but it's about Epstein because Trump is getting savaged, and rightly so. Trump should be savaged for many, many things. On a show coming up, I will try to articulate what it is that this administration has done, because I want you to hear it in all its disgusting awfulness and devilishness. And I, you know me, I don't want to have anything to do with this guy. If this guy were to leave office today, it wouldn't be a moment too soon. He's destroyed the executive branch. He's deformed it. I'm not exactly sure that we'll ever be able to get it back again, quite frankly. But, at Politics by Jake, we do political education here, and that's pretty much our job, is to talk to you about these things. So it's Epstein. But it's not really Epstein. Trump needs to do anything, and he's doing that. And if you look at what's going on, what's coming out of the White House, anything that Trump can do to distract attention from the Epstein situation, he is going to do. And his merry band of cohorts, his cabals, his minion cabalites, his mini-me's, who are carefully watching him because he's showing them the way to destroy a democratic republic. And there's been a speculation that at any one time, there's about 50% of the people who would actually be okay to be ruled by an autocrat. An autocrat is one-man rule. An autocrat would be like Tsar Alexander, not to use the example of Russia again, but he was an absolute ruler. The government was basically him. But the people in the Trump administration, and I'm taking this a little bit out of turn, but it's okay. These people are scoundrels. They are antisocial elements. They're people who are absolutely partisan. They are not efficient. They are bunglers. They're incapable. And they screw everything up. And a lot of the evil they do is intentional. But then also, a lot of the evil, they just do it because they're just incompetent. And they don't know what they're doing. And when you see it, I mean, what have we seen? We've seen mass firings of trained professional bureaucrats, right? Federal officials who are trained professionals. They've been ousted. They've been thrown out. Instead, people with, what was the guy's name? Big Balls. Big Balls comes in and he says, I'm with Doge. And he's practically a teeny bopper. He says, I'm going to wipe out the federal bureaucracy because I'm sure that there must be a deep state in there somewhere. So under normal circumstances, rational forms of human government and human affairs really are possible with a bureaucracy. And, you can have a bureaucracy, you can have charismatic leadership, and really a charismatic leadership is really what you don't want, because that could easily then be stretched into a Mussolini, into a Hitler, or even a Stalin. but less Stalin because he's less out, not in front. He's more in the Kremlin. But certainly with a Mussolini and a Hitler going out, at least in the beginning, talking a lot, that's charismatic. And you may wonder why I'm talking about 20th century history. Fascism had great development in the 20th century, and we're talking about the characters who did this because it has come around again. It's actually, I would argue, and I'm going to get to this on the show sometime, probably not today, it's an American invention. The Klan, for example, it's my contention here at Politics by Jake, was a proto-fascist organization. Hitler and the Nazis loved certain things about America. One of the things they loved was the Klan, and they tried to copy it in a lot of the things they did. The other was the genocide against the Indians. They loved that. And if you go into Mein Kampf, which Hitler wrote, this is kind of an intentional statement of what he's going to do. And I've said this before too, all you have to do is read it. If you just read it, it's all there. And for a comparison, I would say look at Project 2025. That is an intentional statement of what Trump, and once again, I say this with a grain of salt, because Trump is a grifter. Trump is a con man. All he's trying to do, he's trying to do a couple of things. Number one, he wants to get all he can get. And we're going to get to that in just a minute. He wants to get all he can get, and he wants to stay out of jail. And he's got to, because if he doesn't, he's going to jail. And he's going to be indicted for election fraud. He's a 34-time felon. He's a total loser. This is a person who's a buffoon, who is a clown, who, when I was growing up in New York, is a little older than me. Everybody pretty much knew he was, but he was good for a laugh. They called him the Mouth because he never shut up. He always had an opinion about something. And, he had a lot of money, and so the media liked to go to him and let him talk, and he got used to being able to shoot his mouth off. So with Mussolini and Hitler, at least in the beginning, that what they're doing is charismatic, and charismatic is what maybe I think we have here. I don't want to lean too much into that, but I do want to lean into a little. In other words, the problem of a democracy is that you're leaning too much on the charismatic stuff. And I would warn people, if you think that some ultra-left with ultra-left values and no experience, in other words, a Mamdani running for mayor in New York, if you think Mamdani is going to be the answer for the Democratic Party, then you have bought into the charismatic form that I was just talking about. And you will, I hope, live to rue the day you did that. But this is the question now, is bureaucracy. There are two branches in this modern life. One is a government bureaucracy, and that can be successful if it operates according to the rules of rationality, trained professionals, fixed rules, impersonal relations, not bribery, not cronyism, not your brother-in-law, and so forth. And that's what he wants. That's what Trump wants. And we're getting exactly the opposite of what a bureaucracy is. The whole thing now, and I'm sorry to tell you this, I have been telling you all along, but I'm portraying this in intentionally stark terms. But I don't think that I'm skewing the matter. I think that I'm telling you the way it is. The whole thing now is totally corrupt. It's totally based on the enrichment of a family. We've got, various scams and shams. We've got crypto. We've got, which is just nothing. We've got derivatives. We've got junk bonds. We have enormous, hundreds of trillions of these things. And this is, listen to me, this is like a cancer sitting in the economy. And why? Because these things demand income flow. These are interest-bearing or profit-making securities. That's why you buy them. And that's why the inflationary tendency in the United States is so great. because you're not just paying for what you're paying for, you're paying for this entire monstrous, hyper-petrified growth of, again, crypto, derivatives, junk bonds, in which the casino economy demands a big cut. And that cut is getting bigger and bigger. This is why the situation of living standard of the American people is in such a crisis. But if you then turn around and say, we're going to cook the books, which they're doing, we're going to massage the figures, which they're doing, we're going to make up numbers to make ourselves look good. This is where you have, by now, a totalitarian government, or a government that's trying to implement a totalitarian style, which is essentially saying, we don't want to know what reality is. That's one of the, if you look up Wikipedia shows you, and some others, some good quotes from Hannah Arendt's study, The Origins of Totalitarianism, from just a little bit after 1950. And what you see there, I've talked about her before, and what you see there is that she says, for example, the totalitarians, when they see something that claims to be a fact, they don't treat it as a fact because they can't. What they can treat and what they can understand is motive. In other words, if you tell Trump, hey, unemployment got to be sky high, or that it is sky high, he'll say, no, you are a political enemy. That's why you're saying that. And it's not. I mean, there's no reality. There's only a world of motives. And of course, the bad guys, they have corrupt motives, and your motives are pure. So that essentially refutes everything along the way. Once you've taken a bureaucracy and you've taken and you've personalized it, and this is what Donald Trump has done, and this is what Elon Musk has done through the instrumentality of Doge, among other things, but you personalized it, you've corrupted it, you've fired the trained professionals, you've wiped out fixed rules, you've trampled upon the law. So now what do you have? Well, you're in totalitarian country. So again, the tradition of kings and so forth. The rational, legal, which is about the best we can do in this awful fallen world that we live in, this vale of tears, and the charismatic. And that's the one you don't want. You don't want the charismatic. And at this point, let's take a break. We'll be back, and this is Politics by Jake. And now here's a word from one of our sponsors, Twain Consulting. Hi, this is Jake with Twain Consulting. Let's be blunt, shall we? America is litigious. It's unstable, and it's financially weaponized. If your name is on everything you own, you're a sitting duck. At Twain Consulting, we help you vanish legally, ethically, and permanently. From land trusts to layered LLCs, we teach you how to restructure your assets so the predators can't see them and can't touch them. This isn't a loophole. It's a strategy that the wealthy have used for decades. Isn't it time you got the same protection? Call Twain Consulting at 805-380-5699 or visit us online. Protect what's yours before someone else claims it. And now let's get back to Jake and Politics by Jake. And this is Politics by Jake, and we're back. So this is where we are, and I'll be talking more about this. Let's just, because I should, let's talk a little bit about this summit, this so-called summit that's supposedly coming up. Well, I mean, I guess it is. So it's going to be a meeting between U.S. President Donald Trump, Russian President Vladimir Putin, is scheduled for Friday, August 15th, today. At Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson in Anchorage, Alaska, marking the first U.S.-hosted summit since 1988. Security holding it at a military base. It adds significant security, symbolic weight. Alaska has a long-standing ties to Russia and has strategic military relevance. going back to the Cold War. And the agenda is supposedly the main focus is going to be the Russia-Ukraine war, particularly pursuing a ceasefire. Trump has reiterated that a future larger summit, including Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, could follow if this meeting goes well. Trump has issued warnings that if Putin doesn't make serious progress towards halting the war, Russia will face very severe consequences. Very severe. We've got the most severe consequences, though he didn't specify whether that would involve sanctions or tariffs or other actions. Zelensky, for his part, has voiced skepticism about Putin's intentions, calling him a bluffer. And that's, I think, the least that you could call him, stressing that real negotiation must involve Ukraine directly. Europe is basically rallied around this. Leaders are pushing for broader multilateral inclusion and cautioning against concessions made in private. And the White House has characterized the summit as a listening exercise, setting modest expectations for breakthrough outcomes. Pundits warn that this encounter carries risk, especially if Trump is alone with Putin. Analysts argue it could become a diplomatic misstep, recalling previous unpredictable interactions between the two. Because Trump goes in, and he's done this before. In his first administration, he goes in, and there is no record, except for what he comes out and says. There's no record of what is said between the two parties. There's no recording, there's no stenographer, there's nothing. And there's no reason to believe that it's going to be any different this time. So, I mean, as far as Putin is concerned, we don't want him coming to the United States. I think that Putin hopes that this is kind of going to be the new Yalta. The Kremlin bigwigs have been talking about something that can solve quite possibly the situation in Ukraine. And, guess what that is? It's through the appeasement of Putin, naturally. And it could also bring in a new era. And I'm sure the Russians describe it in glowing terms. They're probably going to be singing about it tomorrow, but the new era in U.S.-Russian relations, it would be a new low in the moralistic attitudes of the United States about the Russians. Because, look, Trump talks to Putin. He says, we have a good conversation. And then what happens? Putin turns around and bombs Ukraine. The bombing of activity over Ukraine and Ukrainian cities, it hasn't diminished, it hasn't stopped, but we don't want it. We don't want him coming to the United States. We don't want Russian singing with balaclavas with a group of butchers and war criminals, a guy who is a bandit from the point of view of the International Criminal Court. And this one, I think, is proven. It's a limited charge, but it's clear that he's guilty. And if Putin comes to the United Arab Emirates, they should arrest them if they want to win the good graces, get themselves in the good graces of the American people. So, as I said, though, Trump is going to be looking for a new altar. Trump imagines, and I don't think he has any historical things in mind. I don't think he thinks in these terms. He obviously thinks that it's going to be a great springboard to eternal glory. And, of course, the Nobel Peace Prize, never far from his greedy thoughts. It is, of course, about 7 years since, and I just referred to it, the infamous 2018 Helsinki summit that we saw. It's the one where Trump was asked, do you think that Putin interfered in the U.S. elections to support you? And it's the one where Putin said, yes, I wanted to help Trump beat the U.S. elections. I did what I could. I did anything I could. Well, he did more than he could. So again, the idea that we have various handlers like co-courtiers coming forward and saying, oh yeah, we have proof that Russia never interfered, never meddled in the 2016 election. So what Trump thinks he's going to get is a new altar. And it's clear that appeasement is in the air. So, supposedly, according to Ushakov, one of the foreign ministers of Russia, says that the U.S. has made an offer, it's been received, and it's acceptable. And what does this mean? Well, we know that Russian demands, non-negotiable, of course, right? At Moscow, pardon me, Moscow, the third Rome, demands the accession, granting of the provinces of Luhansk, of Donetsk, of Zaporizhia, and Kherson. Plus a confirmation that Crimea is going to be in their hands. These would seem to be a minimum. And then, of course, they want all of their assets brought back. Maybe they're going to demand reparations. We'll see, There's no limit to the stuff once you go into it. Why would Trump do this? And like I said, the answer is Epstein, 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 Epstein. And what are we dealing with here in the United States? It's chaotic. It's a terribly ineffective form of government. I mean, Trump goes on the roof of the White House and says, we want to put nuclear missiles on the roof of the White House. They're not really visible, but surface-to-air missiles would seem to be up there. Maybe they're man pads, the shoulder-fired Stinger missiles. Trump claims to have 71% of the voters on his side, that he's got the highest level of support of any president in recent history, something like that, 71% in the polls, and very embarrassingly for Trump, he had to be corrected by the CNBC correspondent who said, Mr. President, those are 71% of Republicans who are for you. And that is not good. Of course, to have lost almost 1/3 of the Republican vote, that's not good. That's doomed. That's a loser. That is a president who is on his way into retirement very quickly, either through an impeachment, should be through impeachment, or some other means. Those are the Republicans. About 2/3 of them, almost, have turned against. Now, Trump is also lashing out anything, once again, to avoid discussing Epstein. Like I said at the beginning of the show, despite the fact that they had a task force meeting the other day, they were asked in the afternoon, are you going to have kind of a high-level cabinet meeting or something similar about Epstein? And the answer was no. What are you talking about? Well, apparently they did. It was at the Naval Observatory where the vice president lives. So that was a bunch of fibbing. Trump wants to indict Obama. All of these things, this is what this is about. It's to deflect. Trump now wants to indict Obama for things that he did during didn't do during the 2016 campaign. Did Obama order that this be kept alive artificially, even though there was no proof? And we're talking about, corruption, and yes, there was plenty of proof. And you have the corruption of, as I said at the beginning of the show, and I've said in other shows, of those who are watching Trump and see how he has led the way to the destruction of the Democratic Republic. We have Trump saying this: we, the Republicans, are entitled to 5 members of the House, 5 additional members of the House from Texas. We get 5 seats. Why is that? Well, because I think so. That's my opinion. I think we should get 5 additional members of the House from Texas. So this is radical subjectivism, okay? And it's now exalted to this level. And look, this is insanity. He's up on the White House roof. He's indicting Obama. He wants to put nuclear missiles up there. When he's up there, actually, when you look at it, it seems to me he's making the Roman salute, the Nazi salute. Musk tried to do that earlier in the year. So that is more indication of the increasing disintegration in the mind that we're dealing with in these very high places. Here's something. He says, let's hit Brazil with 50% tariffs. Yeah, that's right. 50% tariffs. Why? Well, because I don't like the way they're treating Bolsonaro. And all I have to say is, look, some court, because he doesn't have the really, except in limited circumstances, the executive branch doesn't get to do this. It's the legislative branch that does this. And some court has really, tariffs, I'm referring to tariffs, and some court has really got to get in there and say, look, you don't have power to do this. This is for you, ultra vires, which is to say it's beyond your power. Other men have this power. It's beyond what you can do to simply impose tariffs and lift them and delay them. And of course, this is basically introducing what is essentially a bacillus of chaos into the entire world. And of course, the reporters who make the mistake of asking even marginally relevant questions, they're simply derided, and they're laughed out, and they're ostracized. And it's to the extent that they come into these rooms in the White House. We do have 2 Republican members of Congress who suggest or are going to propose legislation to ban mid-cycle gerrymandering. Gerrymandering, you're only supposed to be able to do it once per decade. When the census comes out, you can gerrymander because it's proportionate. It's apportionment. It's based on the population, you see. But you can't do it again 5 years. Now, and we have members of the Texas state legislature. They're politically, I mean, this is insanity, man. Well, I'll tell you, I'll get into this. Let's take another break. We're at about our break point. Let's take a break. We'll be back. We'll talk about the Texas legislature situation. This is Politics by Jake. And now here's a word from one of our sponsors, Twain Consulting. Hi, this is Jake with Twain Consulting. Imagine, if you will, having the power to disappear from the prying eyes of creditors, identity thieves, nosy strangers, all while protecting what you've worked so hard to build. That's what virtual invisibility offers. It's not magic. It's smart legal and business strategy to shield your assets and privacy so you can live free, confident, and in control. Most people think that asset protection is only for the ultra wealthy, but it's for anyone who wants peace of mind and financial security, including you. Don't wait until it's too late. Take control now. Call me at 213-465-0639 or go to facebook.com/Twain Consulting to learn how virtual invisibility can protect you and your family, because when you're invisible to risk, you're unstoppable. Now let's get back to Jake and Politics by Jake. So, all right, and this is Politics by Jake, and we're back, and, you know, I realize that this is kind of a bitch session. I understand that this is Jake complaining, but what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to articulate, and I'm going to do this even more in another show, what this administration is doing. It's almost one of my signature lines that on every show I say that a fascist cabal, and I'm saying it here, has taken over the legislative, the judicial, and that's absolutely positively Supreme Court, corrupt, and they're trying to take over the lower courts as well, but they've taken over the top one first, and they've taken over the legislative branch. One of the reasons they've gone on such a long vacation is because they don't want there to be a vote on the proposal that the Epstein files be given to them so that they can look at them and so that they can be published. That's one of the reasons why this is happening. They are blocking this. MAGA Mike Johnson is blocking this. And there's all sorts of deflections going on, all sorts of things to try to take your attention away from what exactly is going on, and it falls to me because the corporate-controlled corrupt media, as I have called them, and I do not shirk from this, have failed. They are appeasers of this fascist administration, and it falls to the alternative media, such as Politics by Jake, honestly, to fill in the gaps and pick up the slack. So you are hearing what's actually happening. I talk about on my Patreon, the commercials, you probably hear them, that, I'm telling you what the others won't. Well, this is what the others won't tell you. So I was talking about gerrymandering and the Texas legislature's, because Donald Trump said, I think you ought to have 5 additional members. And so the Texas executive and the legislature, who are solidly in the tank for Donald Trump, have no more care than to go ahead and listen to their master's voice and try to implement what they said. Now, as a result of this, there are members of the Texas state legislature who are kind of like in a self-imposed exile, and they're enjoying political asylum. I mean, I'm telling you, this is what it is. And they're receiving political asylum, and they're enjoying it in Chicago and in New York and in Boston. There are probably some in California too. And I hope there are some in other states. But we're in this condition, and I cry, alarm, 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 where the Democratic states now have to essentially save the Union, save the House of Representatives. And, you're going to have the prig faction, which I hate, of the Democratic Party. You could call it the Merrick Garland prig faction of the Democratic Party, the people who believe in their own moral superiority, usually are purely formal issues, but, they're prigs. They're holier than thou. They're like the Muslim takfiriers. Stand thou afar off from us. The Pharisees had this too. I think there's in the book of Isaiah, there's words to the effect, stand thou afar off from us, for we are holier than thou. That was the Pharisees. That's the takfiris in Islam. They're holier than thou. And they have an amazing idea. And now I'm referring, to the United States now. They have an amazing idea of their own moral superiority to you. Why? Well, because you're not a prick like them. And you are. And that makes you better. And the answer to that, I think, the people from Democracy Docket, one guy in particular comes on television, and I would commend them for the slogan which we've had here for some years: no fairness for fascists. You can't go out of your way to invoke the Marquis of Queensberry rules, and those were rules with regard to boxing. What you could do, what you couldn't do, no low blows, no kicking somebody in the groin, stuff like that. And that's the Marquis of Queensberry rules when you're dealing with people who want a totalitarian dictatorship. And that's exactly what it is. So let's talk about that a little bit, and however much time we have available here. Let's see what we can do. So totalitarianism, the basic idea here is the widespread use of the word totalitarianism. And this is something from the 1920s, Mussolini's fascist Italy. Now, I stand by, and some of my colleagues will not agree with me, but I stand by the fact that fascism is an American invention. But the Italian bankers and the big bourgeoisie, it could be said also in a certain sort of a way that the Klan, for example, was proto-fascist. And it's not wrong, not entirely, to say that Italian bankers and big bourgeoisie invented fascism, and that fascism is kind of an Italian invention. And the terms are fascismo. That's Italian. Totalitario. That's another Italian word in this context. So this was, I think, Mussolini even embraced the term, and we're told today, however, we've got various people coming forward and saying that what we're dealing with here is authoritarianism, and that they don't want to say what it is. They say they would rather say that the current regime, the MAGA regime, is authoritarianism. And I have to tell you, as I always do, but I'm telling you again, this is hopelessly obsolete. This is outclassed. It's inaccurate, and it's wildly confusing for people. And perhaps it's meant to be. Perhaps they say it because they want you to think that that's what it is. But I'm telling you, here at Politics by Jake, it is not enough to say that MAGA is authoritarian. Authoritarian could somebody like, say, Bismarck in Germany in the 1870s, 1880s, 1890s. This is where you have, and yeah, this is history. Hang in there with me, will you? Welcome to Politics by Jake. We do talk about this because it's relevant to what's going on today, because if you know where you've been, you know where you are, and you'll know where you're going. And so we talk history time to time. So as I was saying, Bismarck, 1870s, and that's Germany. It's not the battleship, although there was a battleship called the Bismarck. It was named after this guy. In the 1870s, 1880s, 1890s, you have this top-down government, see? Which is already, in and of itself, it's quite oppressive, but which does decide social questions. And there's all kinds of reasons for this, because the idea is that in Germany, because of the late reunification, or if you want to call it unification of the country, but the country really wasn't unified until 1870 or 1871. Bismarck then took over as the chancellor, but really what he is he's a kind of dictator up to a point. But the main thing with this is that being authoritarian means that you use political power. You dominate the institutions of government and you impose what you want. For example, and sometimes that is quite surprising what somebody like Bismarck would do. And he said, I'm going to fight these socialists. I'm going to fight these trade unions. I'm going to steal their thunder. I'm going to outflank them by doing some of the things they claim to want to do, but which they can't do. For example, and I have to think of that great comic actor on Saturday Night Live, and he did, and I can't remember his name, but he did the sketch. I guess it was a recurring sketch because it was very humorous, and they called him, I guess it was called The Great Liar. And so if I borrow from this, excuse me a little bit, because he would say, yeah, let's have medical care. That's it. Medical care. Let's have medical insurance for everybody who has a job in Germany. And this is the system that practically it's still there. That goes back to Bismarck. I know if you have a job, you get a sick medical certificate, so-called, it's a German word, Krankenschein. It's a sick certificate, I guess, and you put that forward, and you can go and you can get the operation done. And you pay virtually nothing, ever. And sometimes it's hard to get one of these certificates. That's a different story. But so what this meant is, for example, Bismarck, and by the way, Trump could do this. Trump could be the most popular, and this is what gives the lie to him, the most popular president, because he could do this. What Bismarck did. Bismarck instituted vaccinations, immunizations against smallpox in the 1870s. So Germany is ahead, was way ahead, going back all the way to the 1870s, compared to a lot of people in the U.S. today who would not want a smallpox immunization. But of course, the other side of this was union busting, and it went together with the so-called Kulturkampf, which that's another German word. It means the cultural struggle, which was Bismarck's way of saying, relative to the Protestant Prussians, either Lutheran or Dutch Reformed. And I was brought up in the Dutch Reformed Church. That's interesting. Protestants, though, fighting against the Roman Catholics in southern Germany. So, it has cultural overtones, to be sure. But this was a government that wanted to determine every detail of life? I would say no. Totalitarian governments in particular start with Italian fascism. And again, I'm not leaving off my premise that fascism is essentially, in its prototypical form, an American invention. That's another show. Sorry, I haven't gotten to that yet. I swear to God that I will. It's on, the script is on the drawing board. And again, this had the pilot project of Gabriele D'Annunzio in the city of Fiume, Riga, Yugoslavia, Riga, Croatia, I guess it is today, where he wanted to keep this as a part of Italy. He felt that the Versailles Treaty, the Peace of Paris, had gone too far, and he didn't want to undergo that. So basically, he invented all the stuff. The Roman salute, the chanting. You've seen the films. The speech from the balcony, the arrogance, the crossing of his hands, and the smug nod. Think about the recent things that... And Trump watched these things. Trump knows these things. He copies them. Think about the recent things we just saw here in the last week. If not from the balcony, maybe from the roof. Yeah, that's it. Maybe from the roof. But, there was D'Annunzio. And he was considered by Mussolini a rival. And eventually Mussolini outclassed him, and he simply became the creator of this pilot project in Fiume in 1919. So Mussolini was able to put together a dictatorship, and that became a totalitarian over a series of steps. And I don't know, I'm looking at the time, I don't know if we really have time to go into all of this stuff. Let's just say a couple of interesting things that we ought to get out of this before we go too much further. That would be the way in which you fight an incipient, an inchoate, and in dictatorship, which is informed in the process of creating itself. And that's what we argue. It has obtained control over the government, and it is creating itself. When the March on Rome, October 1922, and Mussolini's March on Rome was looming, there was an awareness of what was coming. And so what did the people do? Well, the obvious thing to do is to call a general strike, shut down the country, do what the Germans had done. Remember? I talk about the cap putsch in 1920, when the Weimar Republic was only a few months old and they tried to destroy it. Have a cap putsch. I'm referring to Italy now. And the way in which this was fought, again, was a general strike of all the trade unions. And this means that there was, not even when the stores closed, but there was no water. There was no electricity, no phone service, no railroads, so forth. They basically shut down the country. And at that point, the cap putsch fell apart. It was backed up by one brigade of Freikorps, which is the free militias, and it wasn't enough. So in the case of Italy, it was the refusal to call a general strike, and that made a big difference. So a general strike, and you hear me talk about that on the show, general strike is certainly something that remains a live issue, we might say, today. So this is how, and you hear me say that Mussolini actually followed legislative norms for a couple of years when he came into power. This is how Mussolini became a successful totalitarian. Mussolini's problem was this, and Hitler said the same thing. He said, if only people had known how weak we are. Well, this was Mussolini's problem too. He'd led a march on Rome. The king had told him, has said, you should form a government. And he was able to form a government more or less, but then, of course, it didn't have any staying power because Mussolini was really in the minority. I'm not sure exactly how many members of the Italian Chamber of Deputies there were, but there were about 35 fascists, 10 nationalists, so the voting bloc was 45, and that might have been, I don't know, 10 or 15% of the entire parliament. So that's nothing. So Mussolini came up with a new thing. And I'm looking at you now, Texas. He did it more elegantly. It's called the Legge Acerbo, the Acerbo Law. And the Acerbo Law was put up in November of 1923, and it said, if you get the largest share of the votes, in other words, if you come in first, your group, your party, your voting bloc, if you come in first, past the post, as the British say, you get the majority prize. And what does that mean? That if you get the largest number of votes compared to anybody else, You get more than 25% at that moment, magic occurs. Kind of like with Trump. "Oh, I think we ought to have 5 more members in Texas." And your 25% turns into 2/3 of the seats of the parliament. So you've got to have a good, solid, overwhelming majority, and there was a lot of resistance to this. And in the following year, and that's 1924, we're talking about the first 2 years, we come to 1924, the principal leader of the parliamentary opposition to Mussolini, and this was the socialist, Matteotti, he was murdered by a gang of fascisti squadristi, street fighters, SA, brown shirts, thugs, provocateurs, and he was killed in May of 1924. So the idea was anything to manufacture a fake majority. Does this sound familiar to you? And then what do you do about it? And again, the question of the general strike, still on the table. They had the cap push, example before their eyes, if anybody cared to look at it. And you also have this tradition in the Roman government in about, it happened several times. It's called the plebeian secession. It was like 500 BC. It happened again in 450 BC. And it happened in 400 BC. Called the plebeian secession. And the plebeian secession was that the patricians, which were the rich people, the senatorial families, are so oppressive that at various times the masses would just simply say, "Hey, we've had enough. We're leaving." And that's what's happening in Texas. So anyway, and I have to kind of go through this quick because it's really important. So the people, they went across, these other members of the parliament went across to the smaller buildings inside these Renaissance or Baroque palaces, and they called themselves the Secession of the Aventine, just like back in Roman days. And so here they are. And who do you have? You have the Catholic Party, you have the Socialist Party, you have another Socialist Party, you have a Communist Party, you have the Social Democratic Party, you have the Republican Party, and that means Mazzini in Italy's terms. You have the Sardinian Action Party, and there are about 125 of them. And so what did they do? They basically just sit there from early June of 1924 until November of 1926. They just sit there. And by that time, the fascisticization of the country has gone far enough, so they're wiped out. They're declared no longer members of parliament. And that's from this. And the reason I'm telling you this story, and we're going to have to end the show on this, I guess, is what the Texas representatives are doing is absolutely essential. They're right to do it. But it's not going to be enough if it goes on too long. The last viable date for doing that is sometime in November. And it's August now, so you've got like 3 months where the delegates are going to be able to hold out. But then you're going to realize that you can't push it beyond that. In other words, you're going to have to find new tactics. And you're going to, we've had no King's Day, and we've had, according to some 3 million, according to others, 13 million. I'm personally headed towards the 13 million number, more or less. So the thing is that you're going to have nationwide, and this is the part of the show where we tell you what you can do. Peaceful, nonviolent, mass action in order to succeed with keeping this going. And of course, we have to do this because there's a grave danger that if the Republicans are able to wipe out Democratic representatives in all red states, they might get more than 5. They could get maybe 10 or 20 or more. And it could turn out that this would make it impossible for the election in November of 2026 to be Democratic. The whole thing would be mortgaged or foreclosed on the MAGA cliques. And what have you heard me say? Don't worry about the election in 2028. Worry about the one in 2026. Because they know what they're doing is unpopular, and they have to make this fast for November of 2026. So that's where you are. You just can't sit there. And this is Politics by Jake. And now here's a word from one of our sponsors, Twain Consulting. Hi, this is Jake with Twain Consulting. If you think owning things in your own name keeps you in control, think again. In today's world, lawsuits, taxes, and predators are everywhere. That's why the smart money hides in plain sight. We help you to build legal firewalls, LLCs, land trusts, private contracts that protect your assets while keeping you invisible. Call Twain Consulting today at 310-997-2204. Find us on Facebook at Twain Consulting. That's facebook.com/Twain Consulting. Protect what you've built before someone else takes it. And now let's get back to Jake and Politics by Jake. And this is Politics by Jake, and we're back. We have a little time left, and I just wanted to briefly talk about some things that kind of are a summation of what I talked about today and what I talk about all the time. I talk about how there is a fascist cabal, and it is a fascist cabal. I often take pains to describe just exactly what that means so that you can understand that I'm just not talking out of my hat, that there's historical evidence and there's data to show what a fascist government is. And things are proceeding apace. We're 8 or 9 months, maybe 7 to January 20th is when he took over. 7.5 months, 8 months into the fascist dictatorship, which some commentators, some really well-known commentators, are calling it. I say it's a fascist cabal that is trying to take over the country. That's what I say. Others are quite clear in saying it's a fascist dictatorship. So there are some that are more expressed than Politics by Jake. And it's just incredibly important that you pay attention to me, not because of me, not because it's some ego trip, not because I'm some maniac who narcissistically desires attention, but because I and my colleagues are sounding an alarm right now. And some of us have been since as late as 2015. And I just, want to end the show by pointing out that the intentions of the Trump administration pursuant to Project 2025 are proceeding apace in the same way that Mein Kampf, which was Hitler's book, that just laid out everything. All you would have to do is read Mein Kampf back when he wrote it, and you would see everything that, number one, the Nazis were planning on doing, and number two, what the Nazis did. And Project 2025, which is one of those things, it's a similar document. As far as Trump is concerned, of course, during the campaign, he denied that he knew anything about it, but that's what he always does. And one of the things that he's doing, and this is evidence of his intent and his desire to be a dictator, is the federalization of the police. And he's signed an order on that, and that has happened. You already have ICE, the ICE Gestapo, that continues to round up people on the thinnest of pretexts. They'll make raids into the city streets without warning, and they'll arrest people. And it's being done because of the color of their skin. In many cases, that is no pretext at all. And it's unfortunate because Donald Trump, who's, obviously a racist, and who many racists are behind and supporting, and who is a misogynist, and who many misogynists are behind and supporting, this is all clear. He has allowed and given permission for these people who harbor these violent tendencies and these violent angers and this misogyny and this racism towards their fellow man who just happen to have a different color skin. That's the only thing. Giving them permission to go and do these things, and not only that, but to get paid for it. It's like a Ku Klux Klan wet dream. So this is happening in Washington, D.C., and we have Trump acting like a king, saying in his comments, we don't need to go to Congress. I can just do it myself. When I wanted to close the border, I'm paraphrasing here, I didn't go to Congress. I just did it. I said, close the border. And the border was closed. And when we say that there's a fascist cabal that has gained control of the government, and it is up to the institutions of our society to stop it, I'm not just kidding. And I want you to know, and that's why I'm putting this tag on the show. I want you to know I'm not just kidding. And this is Politics by Jake.